Hello and welcome to Pale Reflections, a proud member of the Doof Network where we reflect on Wabbo's most unprincipled work as it releases. I'm Reuben Morehouse.
I'm Elliot Diebold.
And this time we are joined by some very special guests from Mile End, Part 2, Reunion Special. Introduce yourself, guests.
Hi, I go by Inky or Inksword on Reddit and Discord, and I played Mile End's most unfortunate warden, Sherry Adler.
And I'm Orph, creator of June Bell and sole member of the June Bell fan club.
Boo!
Oh, that's
boo.
not true.
You know you love him.
And then Eddie was also meant to be here, but unfortunately there was a scheduling snafu at the last minute, so they had to drop out.
And Eddie played JoJo, in case the last remaining character that hasn't been covered.
We almost had the whole set.
So close. Oh well. Elliot's collector desires have to go unfulfilled, unfortunately. But yes, so we are here to reflect, some might say, on Vanishing Points, Arc 8. Before we get into it, though, let's do a quick recap of what happened in Arc 8, since it's been a while. In 8.1, Lucy and friends deal with the aftermath of the Gone A-Heading with Ray, before Durashay brings in the favourite bro god, Metaphos, for some chill healing vibes, dude.
And then in 8.2, having lost their appetite for food made out of Bristow, the Kenneteers bum a lift from Clem and Shelley to go grab some food from a gas station. After a nice chat, Verona kills the mood when she throws up everywhere, so the gang walk back and Lucy reveals the truth about Alexander's death.
Soul and Self, we see Verona's notes from the class on things about yourself that you really shouldn't throw away, pretty please, which honestly is very relieving to see her taking it seriously.
In 8.3, Avery goes on a literal field trip to despair, where she utterly fails to escape the incarnation of yearning. Luckily, Jess saves the day, and we bid her adieu as she heads off in search of the missing piece of her cousin.
Then in 8.4, Lucy and Verona attend a class on elementalism taught by Saul's mother, which is incredible, just wonderful. Luckily, this Saul's mother's class is interrupted, thank God for Saul especially, by the remnants of the Belanger Circle, who arrive to lighten the mood by interrogating the students on how Alexander has died.
Yes, so 8.5 picks right up from there as Verona scrambles to figure out a way to avoid Ray's questions, as he goes through the Teds and then Fernanda and then comes to her. Luckily, she has a cunning plan. She tries to be a Marisica, but then kind of has a meltdown and turns into an Edith. But it works.
8.A, our interlude for the arc, we meet the fifth Kenneteer, the delightfully caring goblin princess Liberty. After consulting the wise goblin sage, Liberty helps America launch an attack on the Kenneteers before Cherry Pop scares them off.
Then in New Others number 1, Matthew emails us the first round of juicy gossip on the New Others and Kennet. We learn about Chloe and Nibble, ghouls with some guilt, 2 new packs of goblins with various failed business ventures in their past, Montague, the fun pool of possessive blood, and Sig, the future protagonist of Puff.
These New Others, I mean, they're so great. We don't get that much of them this arc, but it's so much fun getting these little hints.
And I'm looking forward to the shakeup of the Kennet dynamic.
Yes, for sure. In 8.6, Verona packs to go home and says a final goodbye to Nina and the library, her only true friend, before heading out for one last class, the field trip to the Fae realms. She and Raquel try their best to find a rhythm before America disappears and we go into panic mode.
Then in 8.7, we jump back a bit, get an additional look at the field trip from Avery's perspective as she hangs out and does some shopping with her new BFF Fernanda, before the trio meets up to solicit the services of a fortune teller. America makes her move, but Avery uses her hockey skills to give her a verbal beatdown and a physical one for good measure.
And New Others number 2, Matt drops the last gossip on the remaining New Others. I guess it might not be the last, but you know. In Kennet, first is Liz, a doppelganger with a bloody past, and Jabber, the loud little alchemical helper, Ken, the embodiment of a city, and finally Crooked Rook, an Oni with a grudge.
Then in 8.8, we round out the arc with a round robin, as Lucy reunites with her love and family, Snowdrop with her goblin buddies, Verona with Jeremy and her dad, and finally, Avery has a nice moment with Tashlit before coming home, coming out, and spotting the Crooked Rook watching ominously in the distance.
Honestly, my favorite chapter of this whole arc. Was that one?
It was a good chapter.
It was so good. Caught me so off guard too. I didn't know that was allowed.
Yeah, I was like, wait a minute, where's the interlude? You can't do that.
What did we think of this arc on the whole? It's interesting. There was a lot to this arc. I think my personal highlight was the interrogation of Lucy and Verona by Ray, which was just so good.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, it's a very classic, like, decompression arc, which is kind of weird, because you only really get these in web serials, because in a book, you kind of have to, be more economical with your, page space. But in a web serial, with this, you have these really high intensity arcs, like arc 7, and then you have a sort of somewhat lower intensity arc like this, just to give the readers and the characters a bit of a chance to catch up. And I think that's fun. I think that's neat.
Yeah, my mom actually started reading Pale when I told her I was coming on here in support of me, and I was trying to explain to her that an arc covers like what a chapter or maybe 2 chapters would cover in a regular book. So she's been struggling with adjusting to the web serial pacing, but I think it really showed through here with the Quiet arc.
The thought occurs suddenly now that people kind of complained when Pact was coming out that it was very, like, frantically paced and it didn't give the readers much of a chance to, like, relax. So I think seeing this arc get, sort of more of a chance for the readers to relax than you might have in a story like Pact. I don't know. It's a neat look at how well those writing processes evolved.
Yeah, and it was, I really liked getting to the sort of a new version of the Ruins that was very sort of different than the other Ruins trips we'd seen before, which is sort of a nice, rounding out and fleshing out of what you can encounter there. With the incarnations, which were cool to see, those minor incarnations, and I was really worried for Avery because of the yearning seems like just, the exact nail that could undo her, but she did great.
Yeah, I'm still unsettled by the fact that we left Yearning smiling at Avery.
Yeah, that might
I don't
come
know
back.
that it's going to come back now because we're back in Kennet, but
it might not come back in the literal sense, but it could totally come back in the metaphorical sense, where her yearning for this or that, bites her in the butt, and that incarnation was just seeing, oh, you've got a bunch of me in you. That's not going to be great for you.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I thought this was a really cool arc as well, just because it would have been so easy after the end of Arc 7 to just be like, okay, we're going back to Kennet right now, because this is messy and I don't want to have to deal with all, like, processing the aftermath of the Kenneteers, like, fighting with people or people holding grudges. I thought it was really cool that we actually got to see a bit of the aftermath of what happened. Whereas, like in Arc 5, once they kind of made Daniel and Clem go away, the girls just went straight back to school, and we're only just finding out what happened to Kennet now.
And I thought it was kind of interesting that the whole who killed Alexander thing is sort of covered for the adult practitioners, but all the kids and students still kind of know, are gunning for them, even though the adult practitioners have, better things to do than hunt after them, and it's kind of handled, but also definitely not.
Which is definitely a good thing for the kids, because the people who are on Alexander's level, if they felt like seeking revenge, there would not be very much that the Kenneteers could do about it.
It's probably true.
It's interesting that all the adult practitioners are kind of like, I got the vibe that with Alexander's death, the adult practitioners are like, okay, that just leaves power that needs to be jostled for, so we'll focus on that. Whereas the kid practitioners are the ones who are like, no, there needs to be vengeance for this injustice. It's just another beat of like, being a practitioner in this world really makes you quite jaded and not at all like emotional or a human, I guess.
Well, that's like, didn't they sort of say Musa's been put in charge now? Because part of the motivation is because he just won't bother looking into it.
Well, that's why Raymond voted for him, but it's not clear whether the other major families, what they're thinking.
Yeah, still though, like it's funny how like we sort of dealt with it and got little repercussions, but it's incredible how willing a lot of the rest of the practitioner world is to just sort of be like, well, that happened, he's dead now, moving on.
Well, it is very nice to see an adult kind of letting it go and not pressing them on it, even though they kind of know. It warms the heart a little. And I do think that was sort of the point of this arc was outlining sort of the tough problems growing up and the trio sort of finding their place in practitioners versus like practitioner practice and other practitioner practice, as wild practitioners. And sort of they're clarifying they've been complaining about having tough choices about allies and trusting people and not getting, clean solutions and clean, simple problems. And this arc sort of shows them maturing and how they deal with that and handle all that with like talking Liberty down or America down instead of, just curb stomping her or whatever. Not that they could curb stomp her, but so I think this is sort of like the transition of they were kids now they're back in Kennet with some adult in them.
Yeah, we're getting to see the experiences of the previous arc kind of result in character development in real time. Because there wasn't much time for that much character development before when they were like trying not to die. And now they're like, oh, well, this has, changed my perspective on this or that.
Yeah, they're processing it all, and that's leading to like character growth. I really like that framing of like the problems of growing up, and then also finding their place, because I think that's part of it. Is as you're growing up, you're like, what am I going to do, or who am I going to be?
Yeah, and like Verona complaining, saying, "Oh, no adults I know are happy," and now they're sort of seeing that complex world where, like, Verona's dad complaining about, his coworker who's a jerk, and now they're like, ugh, we have to work with these practitioners who are a jerk or, break bread with, and sort of growing up into seeing, the shades of gray, which is kind of sad to see them lose that, childlike, approach to others and the practice and relationships, but it's also good,
And being a practitioner is definitionally not being innocent. Which, I think you're going to have to lose that both literally and metaphorically somewhere along the road.
It's interesting. The question of, obviously this is a story starring 3 teenage girls. Normally you would quite easily be able to fit into the category of like a coming-of-age story, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the points about the loss of both uppercase and lowercase innocence is quite interesting, but it doesn't necessarily feel to me like these characters are, they're growing, of course, but it's very much like they've always kind of been in the right about the stuff that they're doing.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily feel like they're radically changing that much in the sense of their outlook.
Yeah. No, I think they're definitely holding on to sort of their morals and their sense of justice and everything, but they're just becoming very slightly more practical on how they pursue them and understanding that it's not, I think a big thing is that they can't just solve a problem and it goes away. There's structural things that cause the problems.
Yeah. You can't just turn yourself into a cat and it'll all be done.
They tried to cut the Gordian knot and then they realized that it was like holding up something heavy and then it fell on them or something. I don't know. It was a terrible metaphor.
And I don't know if you discussed this in the 8.8 discussion, but Verona talking about how when she was in that dark place, she used to try to think of a cat to drown out those dark feelings. That was such a, great mirror to sort of what she's been doing with her practice and wanting to become another.
Yeah. God, I don't think we did call that out. That's a really good insight.
Thank you.
It's just the extension. She's still at some level just trying to cat away her problems.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to take a second to, briefly rave about the fairy shopping spree chapters. Pale in general is definitely like the most tabletop story I think Waldo's ever written. Twig probably comes up second there. But this is like really leading heavily into that in those chapters. It's the dungeon master giving you a little time to, buy some new potions and what have you. But also you throw a minor encounter in there. It's not going to be, none of your characters are going to die, but like you can't go that long without encountering a little difficult.
It is sort of have an interesting mirror to Mile End in our experience in that they sort of were awoken because of a crisis and they have to deal with it. I'm just so jealous that they got to take a couple weeks off and go to magic school and not sleep in a barn.
Yeah, they got the trip to Hogsmeade before they had to head out to,
Right.
Yeah, whereas, Yul and Mile End didn't quite get that opportunity.
Oof.
Yeah, I like that as well because I'm just thinking back now, like so much of Pale, like getting all the gifts and everything from all the others and having
Mhm.
like our checklist of all the gifts. I can sort of see the connection to tabletop stuff there. Like you give your party a bunch of like items and see if they remember to use them.
Yeah, it seems like sort of they're slowly building up the tools that you're gonna, sort of the Chekhov's guns that are gonna swing back in and become important, and like a video game inventory where you have the boomerang now, so now you can fix that problem that's been hovering over you and stuff.
Which makes it a little disappointing that the trio didn't end up buying more. Although I guess we didn't see one perspective, so it's possible that someone did pick up a bunch of cool toys and just hasn't mentioned it yet. So, fingers crossed.
Lucy's coming back.
Yeah, Lucy,
with a backpack full of
face
stuff.
swordswoman. Yeah.
She pulls out. I've got this these 6 swords and knives that I purchased while we were there.
Yeah, I am still a little surprised that like it wasn't until Raquel seemingly asked her what she was interested in. Verona was like, "Oh yeah, I think I might want to buy X." Like I assumed she was going to go in there with like all sorts of hopes and dreams, but she was so distracted she barely even thought about the shopping.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, part of that's also just paying attention to the Fae, as they were saying. Don't pay attention to the stuff you want to buy too much, or
pay attention to who's trying to sell it to you and what they're asking for in exchange.
Yeah.
Because, I'm sure they would have taken human money, but you can definitely sell other things there, less material things even.
And can we just say it was cool to see the fall court and the high fall court and sort of just going about business and not being drama queens or, pulling all these schemes, them just existing. It sort of puts, makes the Fae, well, I don't want to say a little more human, but, a little more multifaceted, we'll say.
You don't really see others in their, natural habitat that much. It's usually them running around in the human world doing terrible things to humans. Now we're seeing them, interacting with each other.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Like, we haven't dove into the Warrens beyond just seeing it as, some shallow tunnels and stuff, but it's you don't, what do goblin towns look like in the Warrens or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And seeing this perspective of what the fairy look like in their own society, it was a lot more, I don't know, just kind of glum and grim, right? I guess maybe characterized by the fact that the fairy that we have seen before are the ones who managed to kind of make it out of that circumstance to an extent and get out into the real world and kind of survive out there. Whereas the fairy who aren't strong enough to do that, presumably are the ones that are kind of trapped inside the structures within the Fey realms.
And also, I think sort of thematically, fall is closest to winter in terms of it's the colder month. So I think it makes some sense that these are the fairy that are more inclined towards winter versus spring and summer.
Well, it could also be not necessarily a power or a court thing, but a personality thing in that they're trying to stave off boredom, right? So if they're not bored with the Fey realm, they're basically, all the thrill seekers go to the human realm or whatever. So that's why they're all so, extra. It's because they're looking for their next hit of interest.
That makes sense, yeah.
And I wonder if that healing magic we saw is going to come back, because it seemed like a demonstration you couldn't easily replicate. What are the kids going to do? Call down?
Yeah. I wonder if we'll see Metaphos again.
I hope so. He was fun.
He was a very fun god, but he felt like the kind of character that Wabo felt comfortable putting in because he knew he wasn't going to bring him back and have to deal with him again.
Yeah, I think from memory, his prices for another healing were all pretty high. I don't think any of the Kennetiers are particularly keen to get tattoos or dance for a couple of weeks or whatever the hell it was.
Yeah, they probably... If it was any other sort of kid practitioners, I go, animal sacrifice, easy, but I don't think they'd quite jump on the opportunity to sacrifice what would be a major animal sacrifice, an elephant?
Yeah, we had a whole session in Mile End that was devoted to going to get some animals to go sacrifice. We ended up picking up one that we didn't want to in the end, but that was more of a coincidence.
And you didn't pick me up any skulls.
There'll be more opportunities.
How am I supposed to work with this?
Actually, speaking of which, it is kind of interesting that all of the gods we've really seen referenced in Pale so far are I mean, maybe I'll be struck down for saying this, but they're kind of lamer. Like, they're not, like, classical gods. There's the one that was like, well, I could have been fire, but I'm not. It's like, wow, dude, cool. And Bobby ended up attracting the attention of not one, but two major gods of major pantheons within, like, 8 hours of being awakened. I mean, like, damn.
Yeah, you're right. I wonder if it's like, obviously Bobby had two, major named gods coming at him in like, the first day, whereas we've been learning a lot in Pale. A lot of these gods are ones who keep their names out of the history books intentionally, which just opens up like way more freedom to do crazy stuff with it.
Right.
I think it might have been, honestly, with, a minor god, you're going to invest in someone long term, but with these guys, they probably figured it's like a coin toss as to whether we're going to survive the week. So, if they give him a little power now and he dies 2 days later, who cares?
Well, it could also just also be that Duroker, who summoned him, is not, an actual divine practitioner all that much. So the gods she has on call.
Yeah, that's true.
One of the student families are divine practitioners, but Bobby supposedly had the long line of
yeah, he had some cachet built up with
some
them.
family, yeah.
What else? What other thoughts? What other reflections do we have from this arc?
The Goblin Princesses.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, they were. I love their transformation sequence. It was such a great demonstration of like girly girls who are still sort of quote unquote girly girls, sort of in mindset, but they're goblin queens / princesses, and how that affects they still want to have a cool transformation sequence like Sailor Moon. They just do it with smoke bombs and goblins.
And goblin helpers, like you're
right.
a Snow White getting the animal helpers to make your dress. Yeah. It's
I mean, the practice is all downhill from that sequence there, let's be honest.
Yeah. I think it might consistently be my favorite thing about this universe, the fact that theatrics and dramatic entrances are so powerful that you just are naturally inclined to do this ridiculous shit.
And goblin practices especially, that is like even more so. That is the goblin's whole deal, is being loud and in your face, and it was American Liberty, good stuff. And I really appreciate Liberty's approach of patting the goblins on the head and giving them some candy rather than binding them and kicking them in the butt to get them to do what she wants. Which I think is a good sort of hope in that, how the Kennetiers all deal with other by being nice to them and trying to support them and, give them what they need rather than binding them and, putting them in chains. And that was sort of a big part of their adjustment to the normal practitioners. And we see that even when they're kids there's still that instinct to sort of, see others as people or personas or whatever.
It kind of ties back a little to what we were talking about with Alexander, where when he dies, the adults are just like, oh, it's a bunch of free power and influence. And the kids are like, oh, a person that I knew is dead. America doesn't even, seem to have liked him that much, but she's still like, I liked him a bit, and, he's dead, and it's clearly their fault. They're just going to, get away with it.
And it was interesting coming from the goblin practitioners, not,
Yeah, you wouldn't expect them to care that much, but they do.
I think it's interesting to note the fact that, when they were being interrogated, that the Kennetiers, I mean, they have gotten away with Alexander's death, right? Like, they did murder, they didn't murder somebody, but they were at least heavily involved with murdering somebody, right. And then the subsequent cover-up, right?
Yeah, at this point, they're basically accomplices.
If not more than that. It is weird to think, yes, there's justification for it, sure, but
right.
They have gotten away with a murder, and they're also, on the other hand, trying to stop other people from getting away with the murder of the Carmine Beast. It's just such a weird web that we're seeing unravel.
Yeah, no, I think that's, bringing it back to my brilliant observation, of them having to sort of grow up and work with the world. It's not that they've given up the fight, it's that sometimes the fight is a fight, and they have to make choices,
Yeah.
And I think there is also symbolism in that Alexander was a human and the Carmine Beast was an other, and how is that reacted to differently, by both practitioners and others.
Well, I'm still convinced there'll be some sort of link. Like how much is the death of the Carmine Beast going to resemble the killing of Alexander? As we learn more, is it going to be, Edith or whoever? Like,
Mhm.
they were in a similar situation. The Carmine Beast was limiting what they could do or something in an unfair way, and
Mhm.
they killed it to sort of get, free from its influence in the
Right.
same way. The Kenneters have just done to Alexander.
Yeah, definitely something I'm looking forward to.
Or even just, they were taking some cues from the Kennet others about how to lie about whether or not you were involved with a murder. It's possible that might, sort of come around on them. Like, oh, maybe they were lying to us about their involvement with a murder.
I haven't had time to do it, but I have been in the last arc or two very tempted to go back and read all those initial interviews over again and see what questions they asked, and what was the exact answer, and try to ferret it out. But I am along for the ride for Wildbow.
Yeah, I tried doing that in about arc 5 or 6. I went
Mhm.
back and reread a bunch of them, and it was still just there's so much, especially with ones like Marisica. She throws so much information out there that I lose track as I'm reading it. I'm like,
Right.
wait, what are we talking about again? Which is exactly the point, but it
Right.
drives me nuts.
Yeah, I mean, she hasn't been exonerated necessarily either. I feel like I see most people talking about Edith and Matthew as Prime, but Faye can change what they look like, and who knows, someone else with glamour or.
Yeah, Marisica's definitely on my watch list.
Yeah, top of the list for sure.
Well, speaking of fairy, I have a fun little game, maybe, if people are into it. Which fairy court do you think you most resemble? I'll come clean and say I probably would have to pick winter, because I have a very bad habit of getting into patterns of just really horrible lazy behavior that I can never get myself out of. So I think I would have a hard time keeping things fresh enough not to fall to winter. But I'm curious
What would
to
you
see
be
what everyone else
before
thinks.
your winter?
I think June was, I want to say high spring. It might have been summer. Hopefully Wildbow doesn't get mad at me for revealing that. But yeah, probably one of those. I'm terrible with money, so probably not high fall.
I would have to say for myself, high spring, just because I'm an artistic type. I was the one who drew the character portraits for Mile End. So
Cool.
they're the artsy fartsy ones. So I guess high spring.
I feel like my answer would probably be high summer. I feel like I'm the personality type that tends to play into dichotomies of heroes and villains and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Searching for adventure and trying to do heroic things and stuff like that just feels like it would be where I would fall. But it is interesting to think that, we don't really have a great picture on what winter actually means either. So hard to know around that one.
That's true.
Yeah, I have similar feelings to Orph. I feel like I should say winter, just because I definitely I easily stagnate. But I'd like to believe that before that, they would have been summer below or something.
Summer below. Ooh.
Yeah.
We did get a tiny little bit of winter court, didn't we? They talked about the fae that could only repeat the one phrase or whatever for the winter court.
I dare say.
There was a winter expert that showed up pretty briefly in Arc 7, but the details are kind of slipping my mind.
Yeah.
I think Estrella is a winter fairy specialist.
Yes.
That sounds right.
Well, and we did get those. Oh, I wanted to scream at the kids at the fairy shopping trip to ask the fairy who killed the Carmine Beast. Why'd they spend her questions on? I mean, obviously, I don't know I think the fae probably wouldn't necessarily know that.
Well, it can tell the future, but it can't necessarily see the past. But you could ask it, who will we eventually determine kills the Carmine Beast? So you just have to bet that you're going to eventually get it right.
I wouldn't want to try to get tricksy wording in with the fae.
That's why I'm the fairy mage, I guess.
But I do think it was interesting that they suggested what Gilheim would Gilherm. I've been reading instead of listening, so I'm terrible at the pronunciations. What he would look like once he fell. And it seemed sort of to me that for the Fae, not necessarily, it's not like they're literally a robot, but maybe they just fail to adapt and evolve. So he could still sort of be what we would consider like a person as opposed to a robot, just inflexible.
Yeah. The scale we're talking about as well, I mean, maybe for the entirety of the Kennetiers' lifetimes, they wouldn't even notice a difference. We don't really know that, right?
Well, they did say they wouldn't like who he became, so
True.
That might be, maybe a change when the moment he falls from summer to winter, and after that they don't like him, but I don't know if we'd be able to see, we live on such different time scales and such different definitions of, boredom and interest in new things and old things in the Fae that he might look and act. We wouldn't be able to see the pattern that he'd fallen into without the benefit of 100 years or whatever. I'm surprised they didn't even try to ask about the Carmine Bee stuff.
You'd think they would have given it some thought. It's like literally their job.
I guess they were kind of more focused on the things that the Fae fortune teller would be immediately knowledgeable about, rather than like trying to get into weird other questions that might not even pan out,
Yeah, because they did approach the classes of let's find out all the others in Kennet and let's go to a class or a book on each of them so we know our countermeasures for each one. And this was sort of their, we haven't done the Fae yet, we gotta, learn how to counter those two. So they might have been a little focused on that. If you went to the Fae market, of the items we saw on display and that they bought, what would you want?
Oh, that's such a hard question. It feels like such a trick question as well. Like, I think for about 3/4 of the things that we saw, there were even more drawbacks that we didn't learn about. You know what I mean? Like, none of them I'd be confident saying, oh, this would probably be fine.
Yeah.
The key that could open any door, any other door, that seemed like sort of the most practical, and I'm sure you would easily get lost and lose your sense, something like you use it all the time and you lose your sense of direction because if, the thing that's 2 hours away is the same as the thing that's 2 minutes away, nothing, feels, distance becomes meaningless, but it seemed like the most practical and sort of,
or
that
you
would be the one I would
open
pick.
a door into somewhere you don't want to be and you end up capital L lost, maybe.
Yeah.
I liked the sound of the things that just make you prettier. Maybe I'm a bit vain, but I was like, I could see myself buying those.
But they're not permanent unless you get them when you're a kid.
Yeah. I mean, well, they've just got a regular customer then, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, it's nice that you can use real money.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah, that would probably be my answer as well. I'm kind of basic, I guess.
No takers on the pregnancy charm?
Yeah. That reminds me of Mile End as well, actually. There's some fun pregnancy stuff there, too. Kind of a theme with Wildbow's writing. I don't want to cast any aspersions, but, maybe cool that on the pregnancy stuff a little.
It's easy horror material, though, isn't it? Like, I think
it is good, solid body horror stuff.
Yeah.
But there's another web serial author who I follow who's been accused of having a pregnancy thing for including far less in his story than Wildbow does. So hopefully that guy doesn't ever start reading Wildbow or he's going to have a field day.
Well, Wildbow includes so many diverse things, it's hard to believe they were all kinks.
That is true. Yeah.
I will say, in looking back over Pale, that it was surprising to me that basically the very first interlude has been the most sort of gruesome and, gory that it's gotten.
Yeah, I think there was definitely an initial thought of this is going to be a much more I not quite the right term, but family-friendly, I guess, entry in Wildbow's canon. And then we got that Gabe interlude, and it was just oh my god, never mind. But then since then, you're right, it has been it's been horrifying, things like what happened to Bristow, right? But not as explicitly gruesome.
Depicted. Yeah.
I guess.
Less on-screen gore.
Yeah. And And we get these, like I said, these nice, great big arcs where they're sort of chilling and they have a social life. And,
Yeah.
They're growing up and they get to go back to their parents and have a moment to breathe.
Yeah. I kind of have to wonder whether Pale was written any more than the other works with an eye towards, like, marketability. I know that, obviously, some, people have talked about, like, adapting Worm, but there's a lot of stuff that you would, like, kind of just have to cut to get it onto, like, any mainstream, anything. But with Pale, I can kind of see, like, younger protagonists a little less, like, horrific. It would probably be easier.
But having said that, then, there are now also, like, the bonus materials, which are just, like, really playing with the web serial format and almost impossible to adapt to anything that isn't a web serial, right? Like,
well, that's true, but they managed to make, like, Homestuck into books, and that has, like, Flash animations.
Yeah, true. True.
I don't think it'd be, traditionally publishable, because I think traditional publishing has very strict sort of genre expectations. You'd have to pitch it really hard for someone to think this was, they were going to print out a book, and that's on top of all the editing and, cutting down you'd have to do. I think Wildbow, he's at home in the serial format, especially with, like we said, all these extra materials. But he has listened to fans who went to Pact and said, I had to set this down. It was too grim. It was too dark. It's through the ringer. And I think he got some of the same feedback on Ward, at least the starting chapters about, the last fights. So I think he's being mindful of that and slowing down and signaling that this is, the characters are going to be more okay in this, I hope, than they were necessarily at the end of Pact and Worm and all that.
I mean, obviously I'm biased, but I think if I did, like, win the lottery or whatever, and then as a part of that I was able to use all that money to, like, greenlight a Wildbow TV show, I'd lean towards Pact or Pale myself.
But one thing that's great about Wildbow and his writing is all these, magic effects and superpowers and stuff. So hard to depict on television. It would be super cool to see. But yeah, no, I think I'd lean towards Pact.
I would say Twig, because I'm Twig's number one show. I want it to get all of the praise that it absolutely deserves. But I recognize that I'm pretty much the only person who feels that way. And I
think there's a group. I think there's a small Twig cult.
Yes.
I haven't read it yet, so.
Oh man.
Same. I'm a terrible person.
I'm shaking my head.
It's hard to find time when Wildbow only takes, a month off or whatever in between serials or less. Yeah. I forget how much he took out. It's hard to find time to catch up,
Yes.
Exactly.
So we've kind of bounced around topics a bunch, which is great for these reflections episodes. I thought we should bring it back to Arc 8. Is there anything specifically on Arc 8 or Pale stuff that we should dive into?
I would. I think honestly, my takeaway was sort of the growth and the parenting. And how about we should probably talk about the relationship when they went back home. With their parents and their classmates and Snowdrop and Melissa.
And a rare Wildbow getting a little friskier scene. That makes number 3, I want to say, in total. Maybe 4? I don't know. It's not like I'm keeping track.
Depends on what you count as a scene.
Yeah.
Okay, I did want to ask you guys, because I saw some of the comments between. We got part of that last 8.8 was from everyone, including Snowdrop's perspective. And we've seen in the previous Snowdrop's perspective that she hears herself as just speaking normally. And in this time, it seemed like Melissa was responding to her speech as it was depicted in the text. And do we think Wildbow was showing us her lying stuff this time, despite it being from Snowdrop's perspective? Or was Melissa in her new burgeoning, magicness somehow reading the intent behind the words? Because that was one thing that caught me.
If I had to guess, it's probably because even if she is capital A aware, she's also still kind of capital A innocent, so the rule of discourse maybe doesn't apply unless you're an other or practitioner.
Did we see the other aware interact with Snowdrop and get confused?
I don't
We
know. Question
might
mark.
have.
I think we do. Yeah, I'm not
I
sure.
think it was. Yeah, I didn't try to read into it. I just chalked it up to. Oh, it seems to work better for this one if we have regular Snowdrop.
Mhm.
But yeah, I don't know. Like Snowdrop's inclusion at all to me seemed like the biggest statement, like on her growth.
Right.
Mm.
She now warrants full crediting alongside the other three.
Mm.
And I wouldn't judge
Um,
Wildbow at all if he was just like, yeah, I'm not writing this in backwards talk for like a whole section of a chapter. I would definitely, if I was writing this story, I would have picked up on that way sooner.
Well, and I think the conversation with Melissa kind of relied on us knowing Snowdrop's gimmick, and it might have been a bit much for me at least if we had to like be doing like the double, where it was
What
like,
would the
okay,
lie for that be? Okay, then the reaction
Yeah.
to the lie and not what we're yeah.
like I just would have fallen apart.
Yeah, no, that was because I went into it assuming we were hearing her tell the truth because that was what the previous Snowdrop interview was, and then I got confused a little bit at that part. So wanted to see other people's takes on that. And also, Snowdrop seems to be on track to be familiar
Yep,
officially.
Yes.
pretty good. I mean,
Yeah.
kind of we
Exciting.
suspected it might happen for a while, but nice to get it confirmed.
Right. Surprised it didn't happen sooner, honestly.
It kind of seemed like it didn't need to happen, but now we actually do have a compelling reason for Avery to want to
Right.
do it, so
Right.
let's do it.
And they are talking about sort of Snowdrop being everyone. They were talking about, everyone gets a familiar, the one familiar that they're going to share.
But there's, we had Alpi as someone who was a possibility, right? We have John, who was kind of thought about as a possibility for a familiar. They seem, I mean, John especially is a very like combat-oriented choice, right?
Right.
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, we've seen, that the Kennetiers can pull off powering stuff with their capital S self way more than your standard practitioner. And I think a lot of that comes down to their practice being rooted in their hometown and them still being so connected to their innocent families. And I think Snowdrop helps with that, honestly. I think that plays into their strengths.
That's true.
And I wish they hadn't I guess there's probably still some people who never figured out Snowdrop's gimmick. Taking her to the school and spoiling the whole she can lie thing to everyone, could have been so much fun to play with later.
Although I guess, since everyone is kind of expecting that, barring something unexpected, John is going to end up eating Carmine for like 10 minutes and then getting killed, picking him as a familiar might be a good way to spare him that, awful fate, although maybe at the expense of someone else taking the spot.
I don't know. Can judges still be familiars? I feel like you could still become a judge, and it might just be the case of, the familiar practitioner relationship flipping due to the power imbalance.
Yeah, that would be unfortunate.
Like trying to take the Carmine Beast as a familiar probably wouldn't go so well.
Yeah, that's fair.
Though I could also see becoming a familiar as being one of those, take a break from your job, be a familiar for 40 years, things that can attract some others to it.
Yeah.
Which only leaves, where's the domain going to be?
Yeah, that is an interesting question.
Thank you, Wildbow, for teaching me how to say domain by having the characters literally call it out.
Not Demesne.
Demensne.
Yeah. He really loves that word. Shows up in a bunch of his other unrelated works.
It is a cool word.
It is.
It's great.
He uses some great words in general for pact and pale, using poisons? I don't know. It's for power.
Yeah.
I cannot pronounce it, but and I think that adds to, that spirit. We're wandering away from 8 points.
Yes.
from Arc 8 again. But yes, so my basic takeaway is this is sort of a reinforcing of their self and their connections to the world. It was really great to see Verona not totally reject her dad, though there's some dad rejection going on. Keeping that tether still.
Mm.
Or at least making some new tethers, maybe, so she doesn't have to reject her humanity. She can just reject her dad and go hang out with some other people.
Booker
maybe
says
not all of humanity deserves to, deserve your eternal scorn just because one of your parents is kind of shitty. It's just
that's not fair. Both of her parents are shitty.
Yeah, that's fair.
Well, and her best friend, she saw that messy breakup and how it ruined Lucy, and I feel like she doesn't have a lot of great adult role models, and that's why others, the Kennet others, have sort of become her role models of
the closest thing she has. Yeah,
right.
But don't get me wrong, I totally support rejecting your humanity and becoming another, but it seems like the story doesn't agree with me. That's the optimal life route for any practitioner.
I think you just have to be really careful about what you're turning yourself into, at least.
Yeah. And
I worry that early story Verona was just going to be like, I am a cat now, and not consider the consequences.
It's not the ideal form that you want to be in for the next 100 years. You just pick like a big, scary cat with sharp teeth, not like a house cat that's literally been bred into being harmless.
Oh man, that's like there's a city in Australia that has like a panther that has apparently existed for like 100 years. And it's like there are no natural panthers here, so it's like it's a crypt. What are they called? The like
Cryptid?
Bigfoot cryptid. Yeah, maybe that's just like what Verona could be.
That would
It'd
be
just
great.
be some weird like tiger that lives in the Kennet area, and for hundreds of years, people will be like, "What's up with this weird magical tiger?" It's just a girl who had a bad dad.
I still think she could, like, within the bounds of the story and the events. I don't think she will, just because that would sort of break up the trio, right? Unbalance their whole thing, and I don't think she'd want to do that. I think if they weren't, sort of the trio and their power was linked together, I think she'd be very happy to turn into a cat and be Lucy's familiar. But I don't think she's going to mess with their practice like that.
Although I guess if it ends up being 2 real people and 2 familiars, including Snowdrop, that's kind of a different balance. Like you're sort of rearranging the diagram a little.
It's a square.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think Verona will, and I think this was sort of a good chapter showing that she is not going after that impulse as, sort of knee-jerk as she was when she started the story.
Okay, so here's another question, bit of a non sequitur, but who would you have picked to be the new head of the Blue Heron Institute? So we talked about Musa before, and he's not my favorite person. Who do you think would have been a better choice?
I actually don't know if I have a better choice, so I'm going to let the others answer.
Well, you can go first, Orph.
I'll go with DeRocher, however you pronounce that. Because I think picking someone who took a side in the conflict is pretty stupid, because it's kind of like retroactively handing one side the victory. I mean, like, not that I think he's going to follow Bristow's plan to the letter, but like, it's kind of a biased pick that's going to leave all the people who sided with Alexander feeling like, left in the cold a bit. And I think of the people who didn't take a side, she's both the strongest and the scariest. I guess those are maybe synonymous in this context. But yeah, she scares me, and I like that. So I'd pick her.
My heartfelt reaction is make Zed the headmaster. He's such a good boy. Freedom of information. He wouldn't hide anything, from the students or hide practice tricks or anything. Obviously that's not super practical in terms of the whole power imbalance and stability and everything. I think it would have been nice to see Raymond try to stick on and, work through his issues. And maybe he wouldn't have been as hands-on a headmaster, but I think he could have dealt with his, programs and everything with some of the tricky parts of getting students arranged and dealing with teachers and recruiting them. And I think he has some of the skill sets that could let him do that if he works on himself a little bit first.
But if it's Zed, then Zed can be the Zed master.
Wow.
Which I'm
sold.
As an American, I'm supposed to say Z. I don't know.
I mean, I do like Ray, but I feel like as headmaster, it kind of makes me think back to that first class where he was just like pointedly ignoring Lucy, and like, if that's how he deals with like 2 minor unknown variables in one class, then like the whole process of running an entire school, like even for a strong practitioner, you can't get that down entirely to numbers.
It was strife. It was strife. Just ignore that. It's fine. I think we've seen more humanity from him than several of the other adult practitioners. So I guess it's sort of why I'm gravitating towards both Zed and Ray, is that they've been, sort of fair to the girls and, seem to actually be concerned with others a bit, their treatment as well. At least Zed did when he was like, about his library student spirit, about Nina, when they first got to the school. So I think that's the sort of thing where it's like, pie in the sky, I wish it was like this, but it takes way more structural rearranging and fighting to actually get to the point where you can make all those changes.
Yeah.
You really not gonna commit to one?
Oh, I don't know. It's such a hard question. Zed is a great choice. I kind of would have gone for Nicolette as well. There's the same.
I don't think because my problem with those answers is I just don't think those are realistic. Unfortunately,
They're
Right.
not.
It's
They're
a tough
not.
sell.
There's
Right.
no good realistic answer, I don't think.
No.
Durashay is an interesting one because there's a lot to like, but she also I think might be lacking on that human side that Ray would excel. Can you have co-headmasters?
I mean,
Like
maybe.
Durashay and Ray together.
I mean, she
Maybe.
has at least a basic amount of empathy because she kind of did her best to save Soul from his torment at the hands of his mother. That kind of did
That's
incline
true.
me more to her as a person and not just like as a practitioner.
I get the feeling, though, with what she deals with, she might have to, like, when she has to leave for a crisis, like, she's gotta handle it, Like,
That's true.
how her familiar's off wrestling for years, 3 years, or whatever it is, with some other, we might know. She seems a little bit like a powder keg, potentially. I think the respect she has and her personality would make her good at it. I don't know. When she's calm, she's great, but I don't know if I want to see her during the harder parts of wrestling all this out.
I think the biggest problem with Durashay is probably getting her to accept the role as well. Like, I assume it's something that you're allowed to say no to.
Right.
Yeah.
You are the headmaster now. No choice. Because it just doesn't seem like something she'd choose.
Yeah.
Which is probably why she's a good fit.
It does sort of seem like both her and Ray, they were focused more on their practice and refining it rather than sort of playing the game and the politics of being a practitioner. I mean, they played to it some, obviously, because you kind of have to, but, Ray just sort of did his own thing and he was basically the tech startup of practice, starting the website and everything and spearheading technomancy, which I think you do need someone who can do the politics at the school, which is unfortunate because that's what makes things like what happened happen, but it's a rock and a hard place.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, now we reach the traditional question that we launch at our reflecting guests, which is, who is the best Kenneteer?
That is a very easy question for me. Only one of them is a literal cat girl, and that's Verona. So she gets my vote immediately.
I see a lot of myself in Avery, and she comes prepackaged with Snowdrop, so I think it's the best bang for your buck, that they're both the best girls.
That's a pretty good argument. Reuben, where are you up to on the...
I'm at Lucy still. So I was originally Avery. It's changed to Lucy over the course of the past few arcs, and I'm sticking there. She's wonderful. She's so wonderful.
I do really love the development she's gotten and sort of, I think, getting out of the rut of Kennet and sort of her preconceptions about how people there treated her helped her clarify, sort of for the world.
Yeah. All right. Now, other traditional things that we do towards the end of these episodes is we touch on the arc titles, Vanishing Points, right? What could this mean? Looking back, what do we think this means?
I'll just kick it off with the traditional definition of a vanishing point. It's the point at which something disappears or ceases to exist. It's most commonly used, I think, in like the context of like 2D art, Like, so that it's like the spot where parallel lines converge. So if you got a picture of a railway, you know, as it moves into the distance, the vanishing point is where you stop seeing the railway line.
Yeah, that's definitely sort of me, as I said, being a person who draws. That's what I thought of first when I saw the arc title, and approaching it from that sort of art direction. It's that these parallel lines, when they're actually in the 3D world, they will never touch, they don't intersect, but in order to properly capture them in a sort of a 2D space, you make them touch, which is sort of, you know, an error of translating, but it's required for them to be, you know, that shift in perspective. So I can kind of see it as a metaphor for sort of practitioners in humanity of the Blue Heron incident crossing sort of the lives of others in Kennet in the ways that shouldn't really have happened. And also sort of that flip in perspectives of changing your perspective or filtering it through a lens sort of makes these clashes happen, and sort of the end of that. If to end my, you know, sort of English lit art over analysis.
I like that. Because especially, like, so much of this arc was the Kenneteers being on the other side of a murder investigation.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, a bit of a perspective flip there.
I'm going to be a little overly literal and say a lot of this arc is dealing with Alexander vanishing, and then the discovery of the point where he vanished. You know, maybe not quite as elegant or English lit, but, you know, hey, if it fits, it fits.
It's usually both.
Yeah. There's usually something literal and metaphorical. I don't know how Bo does it over and over and over again for every arc, but, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's sort of similar to that. It's sort of the consequences of both the Carmine Beast's disappearance and Alexander's disappearance or vanishing have sort of, the consequences of both sort of collided, and that if the Carmine Beast had never died, then the Kenneteers never would have awakened and never would have gone to school, and this all would have gone very differently. And it's also sort of, I think, the point of no return. This definitely felt sort of like a momentary pause before we sort of leap off the thrilling whirlwind of the conclusion, you know, sort of can't go back now. Maybe reading a little bit into it and stretching the point of no return, you know, metaphor for point.
I also, like, I definitely got the impression this is the arc that is, like, ending the Blue Heron Institute part of the story.
Mm-hmm.
Like, obviously some of these characters will show up again, but yeah, like, you know, a vanishing point feels like a bit of an ending motif, and it's like we're ending this part of the story.
Mm-hmm. I have to wonder if, you know, Alexander being a augur has some sort of retribution or revenge still to get in the girl's way before this all resolves.
Interesting.
Nah, he dead.
I think either way, it's a, you know, statement about either his power or that, nah, you kill a practitioner, like they can die suddenly like anyone else.
I feel like, to me at least, like Musa taking his place is kind of his, not his revenge, but revenge by the universe for his death.
It's a final insult. He's just getting replaced by this, like, schmuck guy.
And it could also, yeah, I guess that could also be sort of vanishing point, is that sort of diminishing, you know, slowly getting further and further away until you sort of disappear and cease to exist.
But yeah, okay. And I guess just before we sort of move on to the final segment, what are we all looking forward to as we head back to Kennet? We obviously got introduced to all these new Kennet others. And 8.8 reintroduced all of the more benign thread lines, like Melissa, or the family dramas, etc.
Mm-hmm. I really like Cashlet. I'm going to pronounce it that way. That little interaction was really nice to sort of punctuate the new other dynamic, and also that sense of coming home and finding, you know, comfort in all that. So I'm hoping she comes back for more as, you know, Green Eyes, the fact, spoilers, or, you know, Snowdrop, you know, sort of a companion. Hopefully she doesn't turn out to, like they said, be horrible and eat babies or anything.
I don't know. I mean, that could be cool. Depending on babies.
Yeah,
I
she
mean-
might ethically eat babies.
Yeah, ethically sourced, farm fresh,
Farm to
free
table.
range babies.
Aye.
Well, given. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, I think the murder investigation is gonna, be heating up pretty soon, and I'm looking forward to that because we've had a pretty long stretch of other stuff, and I want to know who did it.
Yeah, it sort of feels
Yep.
like the last. I guess we had the Carmine Beast interview back in the third arc, and then we had the coin revelation in arc 5?
No, I think the coin one was
4?
that in arc 3 as well, or am I misremembering?
Mm-hmm.
Well, there was the thing with the furs, I think, a little more recently. That
Mm.
didn't
Well, yeah.
actually lead too many places. It was
I
just
guess
kind
it
of like
eliminated the people who couldn't
aggravating the
drive.
readers.
Oh, sorry.
Yes,
Well-
that's true.
It didn't quite eliminate the people who couldn't drive. It just meant they couldn't have done it by themselves, which I think at
Right.
that point we kind of already were suspecting anyway.
Right. Well, we know it's at least 2 people.
Mm.
Or I guess glamour and practice and everything makes it all
Yeah, true.
not. I think the murder investigation will get back on track. I think we're going to have some homegrown conflict first with these new others, because Kennet was such sort of a delicate, perfect, unusual
Mhm.
balance, that we're going to have some conflict between others, I think, before we settle in.
Mm. So another thing that we like to do is force our guests to make very specific predictions. So let's get to that part of the show, because I'm interested
Okay.
to hear for you two, who done it? Who has done the big murder?
Well, I want to preface this with saying that I'm not that confident in anything, but if I had to make a specific prediction, and this is very influenced by the fact that I just like fairy a lot, so I think about them all the time, but I think it's Guilherme because I think he was pretty clear that he didn't really want to become the Carmine, but as an alternative to falling to winter, he might still prefer that. So I could totally see him trying to set this up so that he ends up doing that as not his final story before he falls to winter, but his final story before he becomes something else,
Mm.
and then doesn't have to go to winter because that's like literally worse than death for a fairy, and being a big red scary beast thing is like not great, but it's a preferable alternative.
Adding on to that, it's not my theory, but it's one of many theories. Anyways, Marisis could have set it up for him, tried to get that last game, because the other game they were playing was sort of something she concocted of hanging around and trying to get the letter. So it seems like she's sort of attached to him. I could see her being glamored up and being one of the perpetrators. But my theory, I'm not sold on the one individual that's like the mastermind behind it. I think there's been sort of like a series of sort of dominoes following, in that the Kennet others all inadvertently were the cleanup crew or sort of accomplices without being the direct, creator of the choir necessarily, or the direct, mastermind behind it. I could see, Hungry Choir ate the meat, and maybe Maricissa took the furs, and, they're sort of hiding and trying to prevent it from coming out, either because their arms were twisted or they were implicated or whatever. Given the themes and like what we saw at the Blue Heron Institute, I could bet that it turns out to be like a squabble politically or interpersonally with the Carmine Beast that did it, which could point the finger at one of the other 3 judges, maybe.
I think they're kind of the Kennet characters that we spent the least time with, so it's definitely plausible in terms of just like it's the person you least expect,
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't expect the judge in the court case to have been the one who committed the crime, partially because typically you don't go to a judge until after you have the person you think did it, but whatever, this is falling apart as I'm talking.
No, I like that.
And you guys?
Oh, no, this is just for the
Yeah, we don't have to
Oh,
answer
come
that question.
on.
Sorry.
Be bold.
No.
Declare your intent.
For me, Marissa and Ida feel like the obvious choices,
Mm-hmm.
which means it wouldn't be them unless that's what Wildbow wants us to think. And this is the circle I do in my head daily. So I'm just going to say them because I'm lost in Wildbow's. I don't know what metaphor I want to use. He's
You're
pulling my strings
entangled
like a
in
puppet.
his.
Yes, I'm very entangled in his web of lies.
I'm about 99% sure Marisica is involved. That's all I can say. I'm starting to think the goblins are involved now. So Marisica's my number one top pick, with the goblins kind of following up as possible. But I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, I wonder if the Kennet, if there is possibly, all these multiple people involved, if the Kennet investigation is sort of a like, they'll pin it on one person, so only one person goes down, but we all did it,
Yeah. Or someone was, sort of as you were saying, someone was pulling the strings and everyone else is involved, but they don't know that everyone else is involved, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So they all think individually that they're involved and someone else, but they don't realize that all of them individually think that. I don't know.
Right.
Because obviously if it was actually all of them, then they wouldn't have, had an investigation happen. But
that's
if
what
they
I'm saying.
all think, I've got to deflect suspicion from myself.
It's like
Yeah.
eight people do a crime, and they know someone has to go down for it. And so they hire, and they can't decide among themselves, so they have to hire someone outside and be like, all right, hopefully they'll only, accuse. They would never suspect 8 people doing this, so and that would help with the, realm hopping too, right? That it was in the ruins and, the real world and, all these different places that maybe even in the Warrens. We haven't seen the Warrens.
I don't know if do I want to see the Warrens?
Maybe it'll be too much.
Oh, I was so anxious when Avery almost had to eat shit mud.
Yeah. That fight with America and Avery was just so... It felt mucky and, like, claustrophobic.
Yeah, it was great. All right.
All right. Well, I guess we will wrap up here. Although, spoiler alert, there might be some extra spoilers content at the end of this episode, so stay tuned for that. But yeah, Ink, Orph, thank you both for coming on the show. It's been great to have you.
It was great to come.
Yeah, of course.
Is there anything that you would like to plug? Anywhere that people can go to follow up your work if you're keen to have them?
Well, I am starting a campaign to save Mile End by mailing Wildbow cursed magical items until he agrees to run another session. Sort of like how they saved Friday Night Lights by mailing in light bulbs, but with a sort of element of extortion to it. So if anyone has any like haunted dolls or murder weapons inhabited by vengeful spirits, send them to his cabin in the Canadian wilderness.
I have a million projects always about to be started, but never actually started, so I don't have anything particular to plug. But if you guys are interested in more Mile End, I did on Reddit at one point post gathered pages sort of document that does have all of the Mile End sort of physical book stuff that we received. So if people are still interested in Mile End and reading that, but don't want to read our long RPs that we were very much into, but were very long, that is up on Reddit somewhere in my either comment or post history. I don't remember if I was replying or not under Inksword, so thumbs up for that.
All right.
Cool.
So thank you for listening, everybody. If you would like to catch more of the show, you can follow us on Twitter to see all of our updates on the show and live reads and all that stuff. That's at MediaMD Podcast, or just search Peril Reflections on Twitter.
Yep, you can find out about all the other Doof shows, apart from Peril Reflections, at doofmedia.com. We have just launched our own, like, Pact-ish related actual play podcast, so you can check that one out. That's called Pace.
Yes, if you want to support all the shows on the Doof Media Network, such as Pace, such as all the other great shows, you can head to patreon.com/doofmedia and become one of our patrons. Or while you're on Patreon, make sure you head to patreon.com/Wildbow and give Wildbow some money, because he definitely deserves it for all the great stuff that he does.
Absolutely.
Ooh, so with that out of the way, should we go back to Pact?
Yes, so just if you're still here and you haven't read Pact, this is going to get into Pact spoilers. So
get out.
Yeah, go read Pact. Come on. So who wants to bring up some Pact spoilies?
I will say, watching the goblin dynamic with Liberty in America and comparing it to how Mags handled goblins and sort of her introduction to the goblin queen life was really interesting, and seeing sort of people more, Mags was very much in that sort of binding, twisting the arm service of goblins, which is understandable given her backstory. But yeah, so it was cool to see that you can work with goblins sort of willingly and nicely, as much as goblins can be nice.
Yeah, speaking of everyone's favorite girl in the checkered scarf, I do want to note briefly, because I think a lot of people miss this, she sort of kind of shows up in the first Mile End session at the very beginning.
She does.
Yeah, so if that intrigues you, go read that and check it out. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I was one of the people who missed that until somebody pointed it out to me. Her surname was just not as instantly recognizable for me, I guess.
I think they mentioned the scarf, which is the whole big deal with Mags.
The character is 90% scarf.
No, but you're right. Like Mags wasn't a bad person, but I guess just the way she was inducted into the practice, and also the goblins she had around her,
right?
In Jacob's Bell, she definitely didn't. Yeah, whereas like compared to Liberty, at least, like Liberty's just such a sweetheart with the goblins, whereas Mags was very much a stern, offhand teacher.
Liberty is a positive binding, and Mags was a reverse a negative binding sort of deal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and and I do have to wonder though, if like Liberty in America had to fight against why can't I remember its name? The beast Blake fought in the woods.
Hyena.
Yeah, the hyena. It's been a while. How that would work out. I guess they're probably still trained as like really good binders of goblins, presumably, but it seems like they're still sort of in the kiddie pool of the depth that goblins can get to.
Yeah, we got to see them giving the goblins the carrot, but I'm sure they're also very experienced in giving them the stick.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, someone like the hyena will pretty quickly go through all of the goodwill Liberty might show it.
I don't think she wouldn't last long enough to show it if she just showed up with some candy and, I think it's still, and that is a big thing I think is a difference between Pact and Pale, and that is a part of the result of the perspective that we see it from, is how much conflict and how sort of irredeemable the others are or aren't in Pact and Pale.
Even.
Yeah. Well, that could sort of be chalked up to us seeing mostly adult practitioners in Pact and kid practitioners in Pale, because I think they've run into some of the same problems.
That's true, but even among the adults, it feels like there's more nicer ones than there were in Pact, whereas there it was like pretty much all varying degrees of asshole.
There are a lot of like Musa types, I would say.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No, it definitely does feel like in Pact, the universe was constantly throwing all of the others at Blake that are like exactly the ones who are the reason practitioners are like this now. Like you have scary goblins like the hyena that make everyone learn how to like fight goblins, and then like that's how the ball ends up shifting too far.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas like the Kenneteers are much more meeting the others who don't like don't warrant this sort of strict control.
Yeah, and I mean I do sort of have. I've seen a lot of comments where everyone's like, "Oh, racist against the brownies" or whatever, sort of calling this absolute treating others like total, like the practitioners are total monsters for sort of dehumanizing the others. But I do feel like there's probably some justified reasons for them becoming so sort of defensive, and it's sort of a sad state that it got this far, and that, they can't sort of coexist. But speaking as someone who has gone on the run from several evil curse objects.
In real life,
That I agree
or-
with occasionally binding or destroying some others.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
Kennet
I
others
think-
are like extreme outliers in terms of like niceness.
See, I guess I don't know about extreme outliers, but for me, I feel like Pale's raising the point of like, even if there is something like the hyena out there, that doesn't mean we should go and exterminate packs of goblins when there could be cherry pops in amongst it. Like that's sort of where it swung too far. Is just because something like the hyena exists, that doesn't mean we punish all goblin kind.
Mm.
And like Pact sort of showed us all of those evil monsters, but I feel like Pale's showing us, yeah, but that's not all of them. And like, you can't just be mean to all goblins because there's hyenas out there.
I can't wait until Pale introduces an adorable demon character that's, speaks in a cutesy little voice, but also infects everything around it with horrible karmic radiation.
Yeah, I think demons may exist as the exception to that rule. Demons are probably the one where I'm like, yeah, we can just go ahead and lock pretty much all of them up on site.
Yeah.
I think sort of Pale's approach, Pact's approach is very much more sort of there are monsters out there with hints of nicer monsters, right? And I think Pale treats them a lot more like they're wild animals and they have their own needs. And like sometimes a wild, a mountain lion might attack a person, but it's because we're intruding on their territory or there's no food or whatever, and that there may be some way to, find a balance between their natures. Where sometimes there's, rabid dogs that need to be put down, but...
Yeah, exactly. But dogs are a great thing, like a great metaphor, because it's like you don't enslave all dogs because a couple of them bite. Like, I'm not going to punish a Chihuahua because a wolf attacked a child.
Although, to be fair, the nicer dogs mostly exist because we bred them to be that way over generations. Back when it was just wolves, like, the nicest wolf would still probably eat you if it thought it could.
Well, one could argue the Seal of Solomon was sort of our domestication of the others,
fair.
yeah.
That's a good point.
And it's good to also sort of get a barometer on karma and how much that can affect your ability to survive in the Pact world. Because Blake wasn't forsworn, but he did have a shit ton of bad karma. Whereas the girls are mostly, blank slates or good karma, so they're able to make friends with others and other practitioners and, all that.
Yeah, I'm sure this is a trite observation, but it's so funny the differences in when they awoke, where with Blake he instantly aggroed every other within a 100-mile radius to immediately come kill him. Even before he awoke, they were trying to kill him, and with the Kennet practitioners, the others were the ones who awoke them, and up until, very recently, were pretty much exclusively nice to them.
Yeah, I think reading them both Pact and Pill together is a real great sort of perspective A, perspective B, where can you sort of find the truth of how one should conduct oneself. And
actually, sorry, another connection. We just met some incarnations.
Yeah.
And they weren't quite as scary as the previous one.
Well, they seem to be less powerful, right? Like Conquest obviously had a lineage of practitioners serving under him that seemed to have given him a real boost.
Yeah. I wonder, again, I know I sort of bring this up every time we do a back-to-back, but I can't wait to see how, having met those three, Culler's perceptions of Conquest when he's first met. Somebody picks up Pact after reading Pale.
Right. And I have to wonder if being in the ruins is a specific choice, and it's sort of interesting that and they were working together, and it brings up some interesting incarnation questions.
I mean, I think their incarnation concepts were more attuned to cooperation than Conquest's was. Because there was a bit of a theme of wanting something after them or seeking.
Right.
I imagine that's how the three of them managed to find common ground, is between hunting, inquisition, and yearning. They're all about seeking something.
Maybe if left alone long enough, especially in the ruins are supposed to be sort of the abyss for immaterial spirits and stuff. Maybe they'll sort of mush together and combine into be something more like Conquest with more broad powers and broad definitions. So I don't know if being too broad hurts an incarnation.
Yeah.
Also, is it weird that Conquest got named a lord in this? I guess he, technically was possessing a practitioner, but we've seen this whole dynamic where it's supposed to be practitioners judge others, and that's what the lords do, and then others judge practitioners, and that's what the judges do. And Conquest is sort of weird in that dynamic.
I could be totally misremembering, but it's possible that was one of those deals where someone tried to make Conquest their familiar, and they just got totally ate, and then he had like basically a host. I mean, that's sort of what like almost happened to Rose when she was using him as a power battery. So I could totally see something like that having happened before, where he like gets access to a practitioner, more than
he
another
was
usually
possessing
does.
someone.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
because he took a new human host when he captured Fell's
Right.
great granddaddy or
Right.
whatever. But I also think, from memory, Conquest was a figurehead lord as well. Like they
Right.
were all keeping him there because as an incarnation he couldn't
Mhm.
really be killed, so he was easy like target. And then if you think about the rest of the Toronto Council, Isadora was the only other on the council. It was like Jeremy, the Sisters of the Torch, the astrologer.
And Isadora did teach practice too. I guess she's one of those others that can also kind of practice. Since she was taught law magic to
Paige.
yes.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, she was probably taking human familiars or something to keep herself in that position. So it's still quite a human-centric setup. Like, Conquest was a bit of a figurehead, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's possible that incarnations like play by different rules to some degree because they are like molded by human perceptions and concepts in a way that like more distinct others are in. Like the fairy are kind of their own thing, even if obviously, human society has some impact on them. But with Conquest, like he is a, manifestation of actual human acts of conquest. It's kind of
it's a very fuzzy line. As everything in the Pactverse.
True.
And
What?
You go.
I think that's all.
I have one more thing, which is a question, I guess, here in Back to Pact. So both Blake and the Kennetiers both kind of went, this sucks, adult practitioner society is awful, I'm going to fix it. How do you compare their success and approaches and, for all that? Who's going to make the bigger mark?
I hate to throw our boy Blake under the bus here, but he was so much fighting uphill that I felt like he just never really had a chance. Like he had some good ideas, but so many things were stacked against him.
Right.
Whereas on the flip side, the Kennetiers have started from a position of having this kind of already set up a bit for them. And if they push it as hard as Blake did, I'm sure they will make much more of a tangible mark. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Blake never had that chance to try and analyze what he was doing. He just got to tore systems down. He never got to think about restructuring them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Whereas the Kennetiers are much more thinking about what do we want the world to be. Blake never got to think past, I don't like it as it is.
Right. He was, I'm going to cut out the bad without thinking about what he was going to build afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's also a consequence of him just not being able to look very far into the future because he was going to be dead.
Yeah. I think, to be fair to him, the Kennetiers will probably have a better long-term impact, but in terms of, like, the actual tally where we are now in the middle of this story and at the end of Pact, I think Blake has had a more positive impact on balance just because he killed a bunch of assholes and they haven't really killed that many people in comparison. So I think they'll probably run up the score later on, but right now he is in the lead, in my estimation.
Part of why I'm so interested to see what Toronto looks like in this now is because to me what Blake was doing was the equivalent of killing the Carmine Beast. Like he was the one who would fracture the system enough for something to open and for change to happen. And the Kennetiers are almost the conceptual follow-up of, okay, like the system's a bit ruffled right now. How can we try and do something about it? And they sort of failed at the Blue Heron Institute because Musa got put in there. But like, yeah, like I feel like what Blake did to places like Toronto was the equivalent of killing the Carmine Beast and opening the doors to chaos for something to change.
Yeah, everyone sort of complains that the Kennetiers are wild cards, but man, Blake shook some stuff up.
Maybe he killed the Carmine Beast. You consider that?
Oh, that would
Be
be
a
a hell
great
of a
What a
11th hour
twist.
twist.
The hyena and Blake
Yeah.
killed the Carmine
We
Beast.
finally, do some like augury back in time to see who killed the Carmine Beast. It was just these two little birds.
Do you think would Rose have the lack of morals to create the Hungry Choir? I'm 50-50 on that. If she was desperate
so
enough,
am I.
she would. But I don't know if the
Most
position...
revenants are like equally dubious in terms of like their origins, so it's not that far of a leap to go from using them to creating them, and from there to creating something like the Hungry Choir.
To be fair, right towards the end of Pact, Rose absorbed a lot of Blake.
That's true.
So the Rose who exists after Arc 16 of Pact may be quite different. Like, this is why we need the Avengers style team up story, so that we can see all the Pact characters like 10 years later.
Right. Yeah.
Or they can all show up as bit characters in Mile End, like Maggie did.
Mile
Because
End
it's
is the
gonna
team up
start
story.
Exactly.
Why couldn't you have killed the Carmine Beast a little sooner while we were in trouble? Gah.
I'm just imagining some rogue player being like, Wabbo's like, oh yes, and there were two little birds. And then some player's just like, I shoot lightning at the birds.
Yeah. Or just fully metagaming and like, I'm going to look in the phone book for a Rose Thorburn.
Yeah.
No reason to know who that is in universe. I don't care. I want to talk.
That's a quick way for Wildbow to like accidentally drop an anvil on your character's head. I bet.
Yeah.
Well,
oh no, your character died. See ya.
Fun fact, when he first put open the auditions for Mile End and everyone applied, he said, I'm taking 5 players. And then he ended up taking 6 players, and he pretty much set us down and said, I'm not that enthusiastic about dealing with 6 players.
Oh,
one of you is probably going to die. Quickly.
damn.
I mean,
Man,
we didn't
that
get
was
to that
brutal.
point.
I
I
totally
think
forgot
it
about
evened
that.
out. But yeah, he basically said, hey, if I'm not feeling 6 players, one of you is going to die.
Damn, harsh.
Yeah.
So
That's actually what he does to all the characters at the start of a story too.
He sat down with each Mile End player and told us that we were going to die at some point in the story. And it wasn't until we chatted that we reconciled. He had said that to everybody.
it wasn't the group chat. It wasn't one-on-one. So,
Yeah.
and honestly, I feel like I probably would have died. I had the lowest power rating of anyone, and Sherry was way too hot-headed. So, I volunteer as tribute. No.
Well,
But everyone liked her. No one liked June, so no. I think if there was voting, I
Well,
might have
when
been
one
voted
door
off the island.
closes, a lot of other doors close.
Love me a good call.
Well, thanks for coming on the show, folks. It's been good times.
Yeah.
Sorry, we got a little off topic there. It's been
It
fun.
wouldn't be a good
That's
podcast
fine.
without going off topic.
All right.
And
Thank you
then-
so much for inviting us. It was a great time.
Yeah. Absolutely.
No, of course. And now the show's over.